This is Deep Down, and I'm your host, Jordan Hunt. I'm a composer, vocalist, multi-instrumentalist, and self-releasing artist. You might also know me as former violinist in The Irrepressibles, as the long-standing musical companion to Grammy-nominated Olivia Chaney, or as a musical and associate director of the Theo Adams Company. I delve deep as we explore the creative process and life through the lens of a musician, unravelling universal ideas and enigmas through some of my songs and lyrics, and through some of the profound moments that have shaped me. Join me deep down as we embark on this journey together, in search of answers to the elusive question, what do you really feel deep down? In this brief episode, after a sleepless night, I gather my thoughts to share examples of what keeps a musician up at night. The same relatable doubts of imposter syndrome, my place in the world, and an unavoidable clarity make for some deep thinking about how to move forward, and how deep down we're all together in our solitude. Welcome, listeners. I'm very happy to share with you some more insight into the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions experienced deep down as a freelance musician. Hot off the heels of my previous episode, A Little Night Music, I feel like I was tempting fate by extolling the virtues of late night flow from my younger days, where I'd be composing until the early hours to reach a deadline for my composition teacher the following day. As I also mentioned, these days I can rarely work past 8 or 9 p.m, and show days can be really hard on my energy levels when I've got a gig till late. Alas, last night I probably managed around 2 hours of sleep, which for a sensitive introvert like me, who's a total grump, if I don't manage 8 hours, it was painful. I know friends who are now parents who would laugh in the face of a one-off night of next to no sleep, and this lack of sleep is in no way intended to be a competitive sport. But for whatever reason, the past week or so, the creative juices have been flowing late at night, and the focus has been focusing, with thoughts racing through my mind, most of them musical, so I thought I'd attempt to distill and share what keeps me up at night, from the PG-rated musician's perspective, because it was, after all, music, the centre of my universe, that was keeping me awake, alongside, obviously, the struggles of the world. As I mentioned in a previous episode on joy and suffering, they often have the same root in their opposite sensations, and for me music is the source of deep joy and sometimes deep suffering. I suppose because I value it so much and it matters so much to me. I mentioned last week that occasionally I'll have a burst of creative thought just before I get off to sleep, and will often get out of bed and go next door to my little studio box room and jot down the thoughts so I don't lose them to the ether. And last night I did much the same. However, it wasn't only the creative juices flowing, but rather a nagging anxiety about music I've already created that I'm yet to release and share with the world. Possibly why I'm a bit croaky today. It really is one of the most painful positions to be in, to be so close to sharing music that has been written and refined and recorded over years in some cases, and to be so near yet so far from releasing it. I decided in my sleepy state that the only way to find peace was to go headfirst through the pain and to listen to all the unreleased music I have recorded, which lies somewhere between very good demo and practically finished. That was around 2 hours worth of music, listening on my monitor headphones, with a little lap blanket around my shoulders in the dark in my studio as my partner slept soundly next door. I mentioned last episode how the horizon somehow feels wider and more expansive and easier to access at night time, and that unfortunately for me there's so much clarity late at night, when the needs of the world are no longer distracting me from my true goal. And that's why I realised last night that literally the only reason I could find for me to be on the planet right now, at this moment in time, with my particular set of skills, is to share the music I've created. Of course, I have personal and professional obligations, and I'm incredibly lucky to have a partner and family and friends around me to give my life meaning and purpose. But late at night, when the only people in the internal dialogue are me, myself, and I, the little voice in my head was determined that my only reason to exist right now is to share this music with the world. And so to quell the voice, I had to remind myself what that music was, as I don't really carry it with me all the time, and had this 2-hour listening session immersing myself in all the music I've composed and recorded over the last few years, just to remind myself of what I do when I'm at my most creative, which in my day-to-day life I often forget. I'm just going from task to task. I kind of forget that innately I have this creative streak. It was an incredibly emotional experience to go so deep for such a concentrated period. And I realised that even when in the recording studio or when listening back to mixes to write some notes, I've never listened to it in such a manner all at once, with so little distraction late at night. It was really cathartic and moving, and I understood how even though the music had been written over years, there's this underlying thread that binds it all together. And I have to say that the music is so good. I'm so proud of it. It really feels like my best work. Of course, you can think whatever you like about it once it's released, which will hopefully be not too long now, but the artist ego in me was at least reassured that I wasn't delusional about all of the work I'd invested so much time and energy into. Instead, I was so excited about each individual moment and the collective feeling and narrative. It really needs to be out in the world. For anyone who's actually listening because they're interested in my new and upcoming music, it must be incredibly frustrating to hear talk of this music constantly without actually hearing any of it. All I can say is I'm just as frustrated as you that it's not already released. And as I mentioned last episode, I'm considering a way to preview that music before its release, perhaps in a one-to-one basis, kind of in DMs or something. I'll figure it out. Maybe make yourself known if you would like to hear that music. I'm on Instagram at Jordan Hunt Music. I think the only thing keeping me sane and relative happy over the past few years is my ability to put urgent thoughts like these into a box so they don't spiral out of control and consume me for the worse, especially when at times there's little I can do to push the process forward. I know that as soon as a release is scheduled, that will become an all-consuming effort for me that will totally take over my life. But in the meantime, while I still have to keep a roof over my head and pay the studio bills, I must still teach every day and do all the other projects and bits of work that add up to a living for me at the moment. However much I love all of these disparate projects, it does take my attention away from this underlying goal of releasing my music. And it's at night when the dust has settled that it suddenly becomes the most pressing thing for me to do. It's so painful when you can't afford to simply throw money at the problem to pay someone to make these things go faster or to speed up the process. To be able or to not work or teach in order to dedicate my every waking and sleeping hour to releasing my music and helping it to find as wide an audience as possible. As those of you who may have been listening to my podcast from its very first episode may remember, there was a period of 15 months spanning late 2022 to the end of 23 where all the audio recording files of all of these recordings I'd done over an 18-month period were missing from me. I knew where they were. They were on the hard drive of a producer friend who had to all extents and purposes gone AWOL. But thankfully there was a happy ending to that story, and he finally, surprisingly, sent me a link to those files out of the blue just before Christmas Eve 2023. I'm on the other side of that experience now, with the files safely backed up in 3 different places. However, without that producer to take the reins, as he had been doing, it's created somewhat of a hiatus to the process, trying to build a new relationship with someone else who isn't as familiar with the music or the process, who has different taste and approaches and an already busy schedule, while we try to navigate moving forwards in as practical a way as possible, piecing this together. And this is an interesting point because of the limited time I can get with this new producer, things tend to err on the side of pragmatic. Decisions are often wholly practical, with the sole aim of getting the music out there as quickly as possible now, it can sometimes feel like I'm the line manager of a product in a warehouse assembly line that has a tough quota to meet, and that the quality assurance testing is perhaps not top of the agenda. So I'm extremely thankful for moments like last night where I got to listen to the current status of the music and deeply give it my full attention, rather than listening in surface detail in fits and starts to practical issues and solutions with certain tracks. That's not to say that I'm not suffering today because of the lack of sleep, and that's also not to say that I've been skimping on the quality of the music. But to a large extent, my daytime schedule doesn't always allow for such immersive listening. And as the music's already recorded, these final mixes and tweaks are not so all or nothing decisions, but I do realise in relief just how fleeting the time is that I get to spend in the room on this music with my new co-producer, to whom I'm eternally grateful for stepping in to pick up the pieces of where I was with my previous collaborator. There aren't many people who are egoless enough to put so much time into finessing another's recordings like that, still trying to offer his own taste and opinions where there's space for it. So that's what kept me awake last night, literally. However, it's not the only musical thing that keeps me awake these days. I was actually compelled to write a new song not so long ago, in the same vein, called Late Bloom, musing on this sensation that as I age, there's a nagging sensation that time is running out, and the fact that I can no longer rely on the potential of my youth. The opening line is literally what keeps me up at night. The title of this episode, in fact. I'll go into more detail one day in a deep dive episode, but suffice it to say, it's very much in the same vein as this podcast, as are most of my nightly thoughts and recent songs. Wondering if I'm on the right track, navigating imposter syndrome as a singer and composer, and doubts of all kinds about my abilities, and whether I add any value to the world, having made the choice, or perhaps having the choice made for me, not to bear children on my own, which I know is such a sense of purpose and meaning to friends of mine. It reminds me of that haunting line in Owen Pallett's song, I Am Not Afraid, that I covered at my EP launch back in 2018, a performance of which is on my YouTube channel if you're interested. I will never have any children. He then continues to sing, I would bear them and eat them, my children. Eat them. Which, although very striking, perhaps doesn't quite resonate so much in its surrealist poetry. But as a fellow queer person, without dependence, my work is my baby, even more so, and it feels even more important to give it the best life it can have. However, the focus you get late at night when everything becomes clear is such a gift, and at my most introspective, I do allow myself to think I was born for music. Sometimes it doesn't feel like I'm really doing music in any active way, as it's totally ingrained in the fabric of every activity or task that I do, and yet so often so far removed from the practicalities of sustaining a living as a freelancer. When I teach, for example, I'm really thinking about learning and communication and psychology more actively than I am thinking about music. To me, music is just so obvious and fundamental that it can often be the unspoken elephant in the room, and actually what I'm teaching is how to read the code or the symbols, or how to physicalize the techniques to make the sounds that will then alchemically turn into music, or something we can recognize as being close to music. And I can sometimes take it for granted that actually my whole career is music-based. I manage to make my living solely from music these days, or at the very least be involved in musical projects, and I have occasionally enough time to make and share music with you all, alongside my thoughts on music in these little podcast episodes. I think that nocturnal focus is a gift even when it is a curse. It gives me high-speed flow and access to my thoughts and preoccupations deep down that lie beneath the surface, and everything becomes clear and simple and sharply focused. I just need to learn to connect that clarity to my daylight activities to make sure I'm constantly on the road to fulfilling my mantra to make music, share music, and move people. feel that's what I'm here for. And no amount of talking into the void and procrastinating by recording podcast episodes will stop me. Not that this is a waste of my time. It really is a very valuable form of thinking for me, and the fact that anyone else listens to my thoughts is very humbling, and it's always nice to hear feedback and comments and so on from episodes, from friends and people I don't know. So often I'll get a comment about an episode that I recorded, I don't know, like 2 months ago, and it will come flooding back to me because obviously people don't listen in real time as I'm recording these episodes. It's lovely to have this document of my thought process, and I wonder where I'll be in a year's time when I'm no longer in this psychological state. Maybe I won't need to record these episodes. But either way, thank you for listening, and I hope you continue to keep listening, and thank you for your patience. If you're awaiting new music, it's on its way. Do get in touch and let me know if you just can't wait. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and review this podcast. And if you like it, share it with your friends or on social media. You can find me on all social platforms by searching at Jordan Hunt Music, and you can listen to my music on all good streaming services. Deep Down uses bits of my music nabbed from my songs Ocean Floor and Peter. Check out the show notes on jordan-hunt.com for exclusive tidbits from this podcast. I'd really love to hear from you via DM or email via my website if any of these experiences resonated with you, and if you have questions, suggestions, or requests for future episodes. Thank you so much for listening.